Welcome to this edition of Africa 360, the current affairs show that unpacks news from right across your continent, where we go beyond the headlines to bring you what you won't see anywhere else. If it's about Africa, we're talking about it. I'm Maroleng, and this is Africa 360. In this edition, he's Zimbabwe's firebrand Minister of Youth Development, Indigenisation and Empowerment, and he's recently steered the hornet's nest, aggressively pushing through Zimbabwe's indigenization law. This week on Africa 360, we sit down with Minister Xavier Kasukuwere.
Without controlling, without having a hand in terms of the direction banks will operate, then you're not in charge of your economy.
This and more coming up on Africa 360. Well, Zimbabwe's political situation has been in the spotlight for quite some time, especially with regards to the country's controversial policies such as the land reform program. And here on Africa 360, we have been following the developments very closely. But perhaps the most controversial development recently has been the introduction of the indigenization law 5 years ago, which has been aggressively spearheaded by the firebrand Minister of Youth Development, Indigenisation and Empowerment, Xavier Kasukuwere. Although some see him as a champion of the poor, others argue he's a minister who will do anything to keep ZANU-PF in power.
Just like land reform program, indigenization is now a central component of Zimbabwe's economic policy. The law requires foreign-owned companies operating in Zimbabwe to give a 51% share to black locals. Many have criticized the timing of the implementation of the legislation, saying that it would drive investors away, adding that it would do little more than make already powerful people even richer. But the man spearheading the policy is unapologetic. The Minister for Youth Development, Indigenization and Empowerment, Xavier Kasukuwere, insists all Zimbabweans will benefit.
This is a trajectory where our own people become masters of their own destiny. There's the element of self-determination where we're opening up opportunities for our own people to participate.
Kasukuwere has forced mining giants such as Zimplats to comply with the legislation and is now looking at the banking sector as the next one to comply.
What is the next chapter? This is where we are now. We're looking at the banking sector very closely because, again, without controlling and without having a hand in terms of the direction banks will operate, then you're not in charge of your economy.
Kasukuwere's targeting of the banking sector has been met with criticism by the Reserve Bank Governor, Gideon Gono, and Finance Minister, Tendai Biti. They both insist the move is flouting the country's banking laws, but he insists it's simply implementing government policy. Robert Shibambu, Johannesburg.
Well, thanks to Robert Shibambu for that report. Well, I recently caught up with Minister Xavier Kasukuwere, and I asked him a whole host of questions relating to issues affecting Zimbabwe, particularly the controversial nationalization law. Take a look at how that turned out. Mr. Kasukuwere, thank you so much for joining us on Africa 360.
Thank you.
Now, you've had a very interesting rise in terms of the dynamics in Zimbabwe, becoming Minister of Indigenization. How did you pull this off, Minister?
Well, I'm sure it's the confidence the leadership has placed in me. I've rose through the party, having been a card-carrying member of the party, becoming a chairman of the provinces of the youth, and becoming Deputy Secretary for Youth in the Politburo, Member of Parliament, and now Minister of Youth.
But the interesting thing is that people describe you very differently. Some say that you are the champion of the poor, and others say that you actually an exemplifier of how the elite have been able to benefit from their power in Zimbabwe. How would you describe yourself?
Well, I'm not from the elite. I come from a very poor background. I come from a background, obviously, which is what the majority of our people go through on a daily basis. But what I stand for and what I think I'm doing, and which is what my leadership has asked me to do, is to speak about those issues that affect the common people of our country and how we must fight poverty in our society, inequality, and make sure that Zimbabweans themselves are a proud people who will be able to look after themselves.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your ministerial position, your Minister of Indigenisation and Empowerment. What is this about, Minister? What is your portfolio entail?
Well, my portfolio basically looks at the upliftment, the development of our people of Zimbabwe, giving power, economic power to the people of Zimbabwe to do things for themselves, making sure that we participate, the majority participate in the economic development of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a country that has gone through years of colonialism, which basically meant that the black people excluded from the mainstream of the economy. And the decision by His Excellency to come up with this ministry was to, one, link young people and the ordinary people of our country into a process of economic participation.
Now, the interesting thing is that you say this is engenders economic participation, but some would argue that in fact, your critics would say that your ministry has been responsible for the flight of foreign direct investment into this country by creating an unstable environment.
Quite to the contrary. By announcing our policies and enunciating our position, investors actually know that we're a stable government and we're very clear in terms of what we expect. It is those countries which have not been able to say exactly where they stand, where problems arise. We are talking about 51% ownership, and in the near future we should also be saying we want to do it all the way ourselves. And this has actually not caused a flight, if anything, of capital. It has started coming in.
But let's talk about that 51%, Minister. The indigenization policy, as I understand it, stipulates that indigenous partners must own no less than 51% of equity in companies. Now, the challenge with that is that you're basically saying that every 50 cents that anyone invests in this country must go to your government and to partners
What
here.
makes you think that our people are not able to invest in any partnership?
But what we're seeing, Minister, is foreign companies who
So,
are directly being
I've
penalized
said,
for investing in this country.
You come to this country not because you are coming to do charity for us. You are coming to this country, one, because you want to exploit the resources of this country. And those resources belong to the people of Zimbabwe. We must have a stake. It is our resource. When you're coming to exploit it, all we have said is those coming in the mining sector, by way of 5149, will accommodate you. You bring your tippers, you bring your equipment, mine, but let's share. Let's all participate. You cannot continue with the colonial extractive model, which is outdated, which cannot any longer be acceptable the world over.